Welcome to Biblical Financial Wisdom with your expert, Scott Thomas of Stewardship Matters. I'm your host, Dawn Whitestone with Whitestone Professionals. Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between a worldly view of money and a biblical view of money. And why does that even matter? Well, according to Scott Thomas, Jesus talked a lot about abundance, and yet we tend to think in scarcity. So how do we change our mindset from a worldly mindset of scarcity to a biblical mindset of abundance? So here to unpack that for us today is your expert, Scott Thomas of Stewardship Matters Incorporated.
Yep.
Scott, let's take it away and start by talking about investment perspectives.
Sure. So there's a worldly view of perspective on money, and it's about get rich quick. It's a short horizon. You don't have much time. Time is an enemy. You got to act today. Market timing. This rarely ever works. Most of the time it doesn't work. And what I mean by market timing is you're saying, well, the market just dropped. We think it dropped where it's going to bottom out. Now you need to buy it. But they rarely know when to tell you when to sell it, because they're afraid if you sell it, then you might go off and do something else with the money. So they want it to hold on to it. Past performance. Oh, they love it. You look at money magazines of different types. They're always pushing this stuff. But we really need to have a long-term perspective, steady plotting. Everybody gets the same amount of time, but what do we do with that? Are we wise about it? Are you managing your money that improves your life? That's an important question. We'll come back to that one. Diversifying strategically. So Solomon said, divide your money by 7 or 8. And he had mining and shipping and timber and cattle and gardens and lots of different things. He divided his money up.
And so that's
it's diversification.
Diversify strategically. That's what Solomon did.
And it's not just saying, let's go buy, 5 different mutual funds that are all equities. That's not real diversification. There needs to be a lot more thought about that. And we know that cycles are inevitable. Things are going to happen. And so looking at past performance and viewing that in light of today, it's really important. And lastly, the scarcity versus abundance. We're going to talk about that. We're going to unpack that some more. So we're going to talk about the heart next.
Awesome.
Yeah. So there's 4 components. And so behavior follows your belief. Now, there's different relative beliefs. So there's a belief that you believe somewhat, belief that you believe very scarcely, and a belief that you wholeheartedly or fully believe. And so that sets direction, and direction sets the path towards your destiny. And it's important to make good decisions. So when you were young and you were growing up and you think about, how did money influence you? And does those thoughts still impact you today? For most people, it does. It's embedded.
Yes. And Scott, from a therapeutic mindset, which is, of course, my background, we understand that we have our head beliefs and our heart beliefs, which actually is left brain and right brain. And so very often, when you see the therapist on TV saying, how does that make you feel? Well, what we feel tells us what we really believe. We can have an intellectual belief about something. We can know in our head that something is true, but we act on our heartfelt beliefs. So the way you put this in a heart is important.
Yep. So stewardship is one aspect, and we're talking about, Psalms 24:1. We'll talk about God owning it all, and contentment. And so learning to be content, and then faith is another component, and then wisdom. So there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible. And in fact, there's a whole book that's about wisdom called Proverbs. So here's the heart. So Psalms 24:1, the earth is the Lord's, everything in it, the world and all its people belong to him. Well, you have to start with that perspective. So you think about a king, God is the king, and we're in his kingdom. And so if the world and all the people belong to him, well, what do we own? We don't own anything. And it takes some pressure off a Christian as you're thinking about that, and you go, okay, God owns it all. I can remember, in fact, I'm thinking about when I was very young, and this gentleman was a friend of mine. His wife got in a wreck, somebody smashed their new Volvo, and it's gorgeous Volvo. And I remember he got the phone call, and then he saw the car, and he says, well, it was God's car. He wasn't upset at all about it. And I was like, wow, I mean, I can't imagine that. And he was just like, well, it was God's car. So that's interesting. So then we also need to look at contentment. So Hebrews 13:5, do not love money, be satisfied with what you have, for God has said, I will never fail you, I will never abandon you. Apostle Paul said, I learned to be content at whatever stage of having plenty or being in lack. And he says, and he says this in Philippians 4, and he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So he acknowledged where he needed to turn to in that lack or even in the abundance, always turning to that. So we talk about the faith component, Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Mm-hmm. Aren't we getting back to beliefs? Aren't we getting back to, do you scarcely believe it? Well, if you strongly believe something, that solidifies your convictions. And the conviction of things not seen, it's important that we take part of this faith in our heart in order to allow God to lead us. All right. And there's also one of my favorite verses in Hebrews is Hebrews 11:6. And it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God, for he who comes to God must believe that he is who he says he is, and he is the rewarder of those who seek him. And I just love that because we know we need to have faith. Yes. Lastly, wisdom.
And yep. When we are that trust in him, that heartfelt trust in him, we're trusting in God. We're not trusting in outcomes.
Yes.
When we trust in God, we can let the outcomes be his, and it just gives us this sense of solidity and certainty and
freedom,
contentment and rest
mm-hmm.
that allows us to move forward and to step into things with that faith that we need. So I think that's important. And trusting that God will reward us as we believe in him and as we trust in the things that we don't see. So thanks, Scott. This is good.
So the last part of this is wisdom on the heart. And so do I believe God's wisdom is true and that it's available? That it's available today? Mm-hmm. And I do. And there are times when I falter in that because I get messages from the world that pound me and give me doubts about it at times. And so I have to, push that back off and get clarity about, is that poverty thinking? Mm-hmm. So James 3:16 says, for wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. Mm-hmm. That's rough. But also in James, it says in James 1:5, it says, if we lack wisdom, God will give it to us generously. We can ask God. And guess what? It even goes on. The one thing I noticed as I was looking at this the other day, and I'm going, I never finished the end of it. And it says, and God's not going to judge you. Mm-hmm. So I always, with that verse, it was always, okay, I'm going to ask God for wisdom. And he has wisdom, and I can ask him. But that last little piece where he's not going to judge me, mm-hmm. for some reason, that just like popped off the page for me. And so anyways, it's fun because at different times you read through the Bible and you'll be at a different place in time, mm-hmm. and something speaks to your heart differently. I love that about God's word.
Yes. And there's a lot in the Bible about money, isn't there, Scott?
So there is about money and possessions. There's some 2,500 plus verses that talk about money and possessions. There's like 287 specific counsel. Now we'll talk about, seeking wise counsel, avoiding debt and becoming a slave, invest your money wisely, consider, before you build the tower, consider the cost and think about those costs because you don't want to be the laughing stock of the neighborhood for starting a project and not finishing it. So knowing the condition of your flocks, mm-hmm. That's an important one. Knowing, what do you have? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because several times in the Bible, think about this. God would say, what's in your hand, Moses? A staff. Jesus would say, well, what do we have? Well, we have a boy with, a couple loaves of bread, 5 loaves and two fish, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Yeah, he's got lunch, Hey, we could do something with that. You can do something with what you have. So hear this. What you have right now is enough, but you need to lean into God's wisdom in faith and do the things that God asks you to do next. Okay? Yeah. So Psalms 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So if God owns it all, we're stewards. So my firm's called Stewardship Matters because it does matter. And stewardship can be time, talents, treasures, truth, and relationships. And when we take God's truth and we take how we serve and the things that we're doing and the treasures, by the way, the talents come from God too. He provides us with those talents. All wealth comes. I had somebody the other day, they go, Scott, one of my favorite lessons was Stephen Jobs in one of his last talks. And I go, did you hear King David in his last prayer and talk in 1 Chronicles 29? And it is fabulous. Of course, he's got a huge crowd there. They're dedicating the temple, and go and read 1 Chronicles 29. And it's real clear that David, his whole life, all this wealth, all the treasure, all the talents, all the ability to earn wealth, all of that came from you, God. Fully acknowledge. I love that. I hope you're inspired. If you go back and read that it'll inspire your heart. So there's only 5 things you can do with this temporary money. So this is spelled out so we can live with it. Yeah, go back. Go back to the page before. One more.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So you can live on your money. That's your lifestyle. You can invest, which is to grow your money. You can pay debts, and you can pay taxes, and you can give. And so God has a provision where he says, okay, to the Jewish people, here's your tenth, your tithe. And then there were special tithes and special offerings and other things. It's really more than 10%. And in New Testament giving, we start looking at Corinthians. And you look in Corinthians chapter 9 and you start seeing, wow, the Macedonian church and give generously even when they were like suffering and sacrificially and not under guilt or compulsion, but out of their hearts, they freely gave. And there's actually, I do a talk on 8 different levels of biblical giving. There are 11 paths and 5 major categories, biblically speaking, and then I can talk on that. And maybe that's another talk we do in another future time. So let's go to the next page. I actually woke up in the middle of the night after I saw this. This was from Kingdom Advisors, and I saw this, and so I created something, and God gave me this next screen, which is what I call the only 5 things. And so you think about this income bucket. And so you can have earnings from your job or a pension, which may be Social Security, royalties from intellectual properties, song rights, things like that. Income properties would be like rental properties, investment dividends and capital gains, things that you've invested money in. So over on the far left, there's debt and taxes. These are obligations. But guess what? If you've eliminated your debt, you now have more money for other things like saving and giving and spending, right? If you could do good tax planning, render to Caesar what's Caesar's, render to God what's God's. And if we could minimize taxes with good planning, then that also frees up some money. So saving and investing, you see the orange arrow brings it back up for additional things to purchase. And it's not just saving to save, okay? And giving is on here. And so much of what everything we see today is all about spend today, live today. And in fact, the whole idea of retirement is actually a fairly new idea. So in the 1860s, Otto von Bismarck had some problems in Germany. And what happened is there was unemployment about 30%. And they had mostly these are young people that were unemployed. And so they created a system where you're 65 years or older, they were going to start paying you a pension and getting you to retire, because these people didn't want to retire. They were clockmakers and whatever. And so now they would retire and they would free up a new job for somebody young. And so in 1934, we were having the Great Depression here, and we started old age insurance. That was the first name of Social Security. And so 1935 was the first Social Security payment. And we started the same thing, age 65. But really, prior to Otto von Bismarck and FDR signing this in as laws for, quote, retirement, it was a new idea. The only thing biblically, you can go back to the book of Leviticus, it says that when a priest turns age 50, they no longer have to carry the heavy water and the wood.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only mention of like slowing down. People think I'm going to go sit on a beach and, and kick back. That's not biblical. We should be working and doing stuff and living purposefully and investing into other people's lives. So very powerful. Thanks for, asking the questions on this.
Investing into others' lives, and Scott, there's so much that I want to say to people about that. I hate the way that as a culture we expect people once they retire to go live in a 55 plus community or go on cruises. It's almost like as a culture we're saying, get out of our way, you have no usefulness anymore. And I'm looking and saying, these are the people that have all of the wisdom that we need.
Yeah.
And so we need those people to be invested into us and into the younger people. And yes, perhaps they need to be coming alongside and teaching us how to do those jobs. So I am definitely with you on that one. Well, all right. So there's only 5 things that we can do with money, and there are also 5 biblical principles. So how do these 2 things relate?
So biblical principles are giving generously. When you hold on loosely, then you become more of a funnel. You're not just a bucket trying to collect and get more stuff. So the world always says more is better, right? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
more money is better. More money is better. Always. It's always better. Not always. I've seen more money destroy people. Avoid the use of debt. So the borrower becomes the lender's slave. There gets to be a place where debt can be really, really tricky. And there are kinds of good debts and not so good debts. There's high interest and low interest. So I had to evaluate something recently. So my wife and I, we downsized our house. We don't have a mortgage. But when we were looking at a particular car came up, but it was 2% interest. Well, I'm earning more than 2% and I could pay that off at any moment. So it's really not bondage. It would be bondage if I didn't have any money to be able to pay that debt off. But if I have another bucket over here that's working hard and I can borrow money at 2%, it makes more sense to do that. But we can't bank on the future outcomes. You said that earlier. And so financially, the world would say, oh, everything's going to be fine. Well, right now, we're experiencing unprecedented layoffs and furloughs and things where people don't know about their next paycheck.
And just a month ago, we had the lowest unemployment ever.
Yes, so, and it's radically changing overnight. Yes, so we don't know what tomorrow brings. All right, spend less than you earn. Have a budget. It doesn't have to be down to the penny. Although it's a good idea that you train your children to budget and to have those conversations. And sometimes it's an envelope method. Sometimes there's a spreadsheet. I've got an Excel spreadsheet that I love to share with people that they use it at a lot of churches around the country. And it's been wonderful to be able to, share that with people and let them use that resource. Setting long-term goals. Did you want to say something about the budget?
Yes, you were talking about teaching our kids how to budget. We had a bank with 3 different sections in it, give some, save some, and spend some. And we taught our kids about, giving 10% at church every week and saving 10% into a bank account. And we would take them to the bank every once in a while to put money in the bank, and then having 80% to spend. and they learned early, and they still practice those habits. So starting kids early with just very simple budgeting is so important.
Absolutely. Having some long-term goals. If you
Mhm.
don't have a long-term goal, so it's interesting to find that successful families, businesses, countries, they need something to stand for. They need, we needed, in addition to the Constitution, that we needed the Declaration of Independence.
Mhm.
It gave more life to what the Constitution was. We need things in our lives that draw us long term, to think about our legacy and where do we see ourselves, a long ways down the road. What are opportunities? What's possible?
Mhm.
I mean, there's so much that's possible, and we get, well, here's what the world says. You're not going to be able to accomplish that. And so there's this number. Let me just say this real emphatically. The people that are listening out there, you're more than a number. And so many times financial services will tell you you're a number. And they'll tell you a number as if, well, I have $500,000 or $1 million or some number, and you need to get to another number. But they never tell you, is it enough? Or, really what's going on to improve your life? And so talking about the quality of your life and not just about a quantity number, because remember, you've also got to deal with cash flow. You don't spend assets, you spend cash flow. And there's some planning around that requires some special tools and some knowledge and experience. And I'd love to have that conversation with you. Plan for financial margin. If you don't have margin, then you're going to be forced into somebody else's belief system. Somebody else's priorities are pushed on you if you don't have some margin. I have to tell you, I have to fight with margin for my wife and I, my children, even within your own family or within your church family or extended family of family and friends. There's a lot of pull. And with all that pull, you've got to be careful, and you've got to know what's your long-term goals and what are you trying to accomplish, but also be sensitive to what God has to lead you in right now. Being
Is that what
sensitive.
an emergency fund is for? Is margin?
So an emergency fund is for margin, and a bigger emergency fund is necessary when you have, let's say, a lot of debt. You've got a job that's more insecure. You need more margin under certain types of circumstances where you might have more risk that are out there. You might need a little less margin if things have been steadily put away and now you've accumulated some assets and those are working towards you. You may need a little bit less margin down the road. Okay.
Interesting. Okay. And so all of these are puzzle pieces, and with these 5 things, you've got the whole puzzle.
Yep.
Okay.
There was one verse back on that. Let's go back to that one second. So actually it wasn't on here. Oh, there it is, right in the middle. Proverbs 13:11. So Proverbs 13:11 says, wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase. Of course, that's the King James Version. But it's so important to know that when you do accumulate money, it does matter where income comes from. And if there are shady deals, there's a kingdom of lies. Satan is the father of lies. And when you do stuff with honesty and with truthfulness, and you acquire it through labor and through thinking smartly about the things you're doing, really, really key on where that income comes from. Because I hear a lot of people who say, oh, let's go make a bunch of money. Let's go do this thing. Maybe they're talking about Bitcoin or some fad that's out there. Be careful. Be so careful about not squandering your money and throwing it away and the get rich quick schemes. Okay.
Because it matters where it comes from.
It does matter. In fact, even in the offering plate, it said that Jesus, it says that the offering wasn't acceptable by a temple prostitute, couldn't bring their offerings. And so if there's blood, remember when Judas had betrayed Jesus, and he comes back to the Sanhedrin, and he has his 30 pieces of silver, and he throws it on the floor, and he says, "You got to take this back." And you know what the Sanhedrin said?
It's blood money.
It's blood money. We can't take it back. They appointed somebody that was on the peripheral edge to say, "Go buy Potiphar's field with that." And the people who don't have a burial spot, and Judas went out and hung himself and was buried in Potter's field that was purchased by this blood money. So not all offerings are acceptable. So we have to think about our source of, where do we earn money? What are we investing in? Are we investing into an industry or a company or a practice or a business venture that's not honoring to God? That's important to think about that. And each person needs to pray about that and should have conversations. And sometimes people ask me, "Scott, help me keep me accountable in this area." And I have some people that ask me to keep them accountable.
That is so important. And we do need one another to help us with these things.
Yeah, I love Ron Blue. He's one of the founders of Kingdom Advisors, a national group. And so he had this thing that was revelation. It was a real revelation to me. And I think I heard him in Orlando. It was about 2004. And he came and spoke downtown. And a friend of mine, Jeff, invited me. And so I went, and he said, financial advice is in reality spiritual advice, because money is how you work out your belief system, your values, your goals, your priorities. And he says, one other thing he said too, that I'd heard Larry Burkett say a lot of times: show me your calendar and show me your checkbook, and I'll tell you what your priorities are.
So what we spend our time and our money on,
time and money,
what we value.
And if you looked at my calendar and my bank over the last 20 years, a big pile of that's gone into my children. Education, tutoring, experiences, building into their lives truth, building into their lives perspective, giving them appreciation for God honoring types of things. And so a tremendous amount of resources that when people would look at our stuff, they say, "Wow, you're really going overboard with your kids about this," because we want to lavish on them, not in a spoiled way, but in a truthful way, in truthful living and good decision making. And that's just something that my wife and I have had a very strong conviction about when we got married. So life is all about decisions. Decisions set the path of direction, and direction determines your destiny.
That's profound.
So there was a guy who said one time, and I'm drawing a blank on who said it, but he said, success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal. And that's pretty powerful. So as you progress, you're moving in a direction. It's important to know that that direction is really good, because if you're going in the right direction and you know you're going in the right direction, you don't worry about the end result. You know you're making progress each day. You're moving that direction. But if you can identify, I'm not going in the right direction, well, get off that path, make some changes, get some counseling, some tutoring, some mentoring, get some accountability. Get something back into your life that can get you back on the path to the success. All right, what's the next slide?
Excellent.
Saving to save. Oh my. So these are peanuts right here, I believe. No, those aren't peanuts. Those are some kind of legumes.
Like black-eyed peas.
They're some kind of a legume. So anyways, the industry, the financial services industry, is all about get people to save more. I've been to trainings, I've been to conferences, I've been all kinds of different places, and they'll say, move your clients from 4% savings to 6%. Move them the next year from 6% to 8%. And so there's automatic enrollments. There's things that are pushing people to save. A lot of times they're saving even when they're young, they're invested too conservatively.
What's the difference between saving and hoarding? Because it sounds like what you're describing is hoarding.
No, No, we're talking about like a 401k, 403b, some kind of a employer retirement plan, or having savings at the bank to be able to save some dollars for the rainy day, the contingency, the emergency fund. And oftentimes the return on that is not very good. It's just addition. And right now, if you looked at the bank interest rates, it's, almost zero. I mean, it would take decades and decades to double your money. And so it's such a low rate that we have to think differently instead of just saving to save. And it is important. So all Christians, we need to save. We need to have a pattern of saving, but we're not saving with the purpose just to save. You get some monies that are saved, but then now you need to think very differently about the next step.
So if we're not saving to save, what are we saving for?
We're saving to sow. It's more purposeful. And so here's a picture. This is 2004, and these are my two boys out in the front yard. And I have to tell you that interesting, real quick story is, so I call this God's math, and this is powerful. And I hope you really are blessed by this. I actually have a YouTube video on this, and I've shared this with lots of people and love sharing this story and love the interactions from this story. So my boys came home from kindergarten and pre-K, and they had one of these little tiny beans that were sprouting out of a bean thing. They planted a seed, and they weren't impressed at all. And I said, "This is amazing. This is life. This is seed, soil, sunshine, rain. This is God's good stuff. You should be excited about that." They go, "Dad, this is nothing. This is a bean. I mean, come on, it's a little cup." And I'm going, this. And I went to bed that night, and I couldn't sleep. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and God told me, "Go take the boys to the store this weekend. I'm getting a tray with 36 spots in it. I'm putting some soil in there, and get some burpee seeds. Find something big and bodacious." So we got mammoth sunflower seeds for $1 burpee seeds. 36 seeds, only 33 germinated. So not all the result was the same. 3 of them, when we transplanted them about 2 weeks later, 3 of them kind of shriveled up and died. So again, that was a life lesson. And so those 30 seeds, get this, they were 6 to 12 feet tall. So this is one of the ones that's 12 feet tall. They're standing, some of them are drooping over. This is Colin Mason. And we watched birds and squirrels come and enjoy this. And then we decided to harvest. Now, I didn't count every single one. I think we got to like 20-something thousand. My boys gave up on me. We counted 20-something thousand seeds. And then we started just measuring like 4 cups and then measuring how many seeds were in 4 cups and then just gathering the seeds from there. 72,000 seeds were left over.
Out of planting 30.
Out of planting the 30, 72,000 seeds were left over. So this is huge. Okay, this is gigantic. And so the returns on this were like off the chart. So I told my boys, I said, so what if we took that $1 burpee seeds and now we got the 72,000 seeds? What if those 72,000 seeds, we could scatter that and now grow that? It only took 3.5 months to do this. So what if we did this 3 more times? So if we had a growing season that was year round and we could potentially have all that out there, 30 seeds would grow to 28,800,000,000 seeds. That's almost $1 billion of retail value off of $1 in 1 year. That
you run out of ground before you ran out of seeds.
Yes, you run out of ground. You run out of water and ground and everything. I don't know. I mean, but that's just God's math. That's the way stuff works. And so I want people to also realize you could be an artist and you have a canvas and some paints, and God gives you a beautiful picture and you sell it for hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands. Maybe you create something. Maybe it's music, or maybe you're like a friend of mine who buys and sells cars. He'll go to one auction, buy a car, and the next week he takes it back to the same auction or another auction, and he'll just make some little tweaking fix or whatever. And sure enough, he doubles his money. A lot of times he'll double the money. He'll buy it for $700 and sell it for $1,500. And so it's like, it's a double in a week. And so we can do all kinds of things. And I've seen this, and I've had lots of powerful conversations. And it's about taking what is our unique God-gifted abilities, and now trusting God and leaning into that and say, God bless this. And it's not looking at like, okay, what's that result? Because sometimes the results, things get changed. The economy changes, your product or whatever doesn't go so well. I've talked to nurserymen. In fact, I even bought a nursery with, it was 3 acres, and we bought it for $31,000. I bought it with a friend of mine, and we bought this nursery, and then we got scared because on the nursery with these greenhouses that were, the tops were all torn up, but the frames were there and the benches and the bottom was good. We got scared because there was a little pond with all this oily looking chemical stuff. And we were afraid the EPA was just going to slaughter us. And so we backed off of it. We should have prayed more, and we had some bad advice. But guess what? We made $90,000 off a $31,000 investment. So after the commission, it was like $85,000 net. And that was in 9 months.
Wow.
But guess what? If we hadn't have gotten scared, we could have made 5 times more money.
Wow.
A multiple of 5 more within a year. Because it sold again less than a year for 5 times more than the 90 for $450,000.
Wow.
So crazy
That's
stuff.
God's economy.
It's God's economy. There's an abundance. And so there's this leaning in. So if you're entrepreneurial in nature, you might need some guidance. You might need somebody to talk you through, what are you going to do with that? And what is an end point? So how much is enough? So, we were generous to give.
All of those questions are questions that we can ask God and actually hear from. When we talk about strategic prayer at Whitestone Professionals and strategic planning, we're talking about hearing from God about those specific things, asking specific questions and getting specific answers. And I know you, Scott, you are a kingdom advisor. You're a man of God. And when you're working with people's money, you're doing that from a biblical perspective, and you're praying over those things as well. And so I just think it's so important that people know that God is interested in our finances, and he's interested in our work and the way that we save and spend and invest. And a lot of, it seems to me like that a lot of what the Bible talks about is not so much saving money, but investing money.
Sowing it. So let me add, so when I showed you the picture with the seed in the hand, is that ever going to multiply?
Not if it stays in your hand.
If it stays in the barn or stays in your hand, it's not working. You've got to go risk it. You've got to put it out there. You've got to sprinkle it. You've got to do the work. So we're co-authors, co-creators, co-laborers with Christ, with God in this. And so when we come along,
like you did with your boys.
Yeah. And so when you come along and you lean into with faith and with God, you're providing here, and you listen for his revelation. First, you need to know what Scripture says about abundance versus scarcity. And so we look for the good soil. I'm glad you turned it. So let's look out for that good soil. What are those opportunities? So in Matthew, it talks about 3 soils. Jesus is given a parable. So some soil fell on the rocky path. Some seeds, yeah. The seeds fell on the rocky path, that is. And so it sprung up quickly, but it didn't have anything, and it withered and it dried up, and it didn't last. Some of it fell on some soil, but there were weeds and thorns and stuff that choked it all out, and it wasn't good soil. And so that was difficult. But then it says, and then some fell on the good path. And what did it say about that? It said there was a 30, 60, and 100-fold. And you know where that comes from? It comes from Genesis 26, when Isaac was working with the sheep, and God was directing him, and he was obedient. His first time, it says somebody was obedient and following God's direction. He was listening for God for this revelation about good soil. And God revealed it in Genesis to Isaac. And Jesus is talking about it again, 30, 60, 100-fold. 100-fold, that's a 10,000% return. by the way, my sunflower illustration is way off the chart. It's like
Yes.
$1 billion. I mean, that's 1 times 9 to the 10th power. I mean, it's like so astronomical, but that's God just showing me an example and showing my boys an example. So see good seed in others, look for good seed. I try to find good seed in things around me. And, in God's economy, we should love people and we should invest in other people. And sometimes it's money, sometimes it's time, sometimes it's relationship investment. But realize this, we need to see good soil in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I find people that have talents and amazing talents, and they've never tapped into it. And in fact, one of my good friends, his sister is a phenomenally good photographer. And she's done like amazing photography. And she has this little website and has the photography out there, but she's never really promoted it and never really spoken. And so I just told him, recently I told my friend, I said, you need to take some of Mom's inheritance and invest into her stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, I never even thought about that. I know she hadn't thought about it. And she isn't going to think about it because she doesn't feel like it's worthy of an investment. And that's a lie. That's Satan lying to us.
Yes.
And so we get lied to a lot. And one of the worst lies is we have a unique talent. Remember this thumbprint. You're the only one on the planet with that thumbprint. And so there are unique talents and things that are available that are in front of you. Look for that good soil. Now, I'm not saying go out and be crazy with this stuff because you got to count the cost. You have to test things. I'm testing some marketing types of things on one idea that I have, but I'm not spending much money on it. I have to test it and examine it and evaluate and who am I going to partner with and how am I going to do this? And, God's revealing little steps, and I've been taking little steps in this path. And it's growing me in my faith, in my patience, because I'm not real patient. I want to like run and pray at the same time. Oh, bless me, God, in this. I want to run, and that's just my nature because I want to be impulsive and I'm a quick start. When people say, oh, what kind of a person are you I'm a Colby, I'm a quick start. I get things going. Let me be first in line and go make that happen. Let's go do it. So see the good soil in yourself. And see the good soil in other people and encourage one another. Be kind to one another. When somebody has a talent, please, please, please don't say negative stuff about them. Try to encourage them and to develop that talent.
Yes.
And say positive things about that. So we want to fight scarcity. We want to fight poverty. And there are a lot of people who have talents, but they're living in poverty because people have exploited them verbally, financially. They haven't had the wisdom to make good choices to lead them in a path that's correct. And we all know people like this. And at times we do this in our own lives and we sabotage ourselves. And we need to get rid of this poverty mindset, the scarcity mindset, because marketing people love to say, oh, only 2 more left. Unlimited number. Scarcity. God's economy. In heaven, there's no scarcity.
There is no scarcity in heaven.
There is no scarcity. So we need to have an abundance mindset that we're more than enough. God will provide. Let's take steps in faith. Let's be wise and shrewd about it. Don't be gambling and crazy and saying, oh, I'm going to go buy myself, this fancy sports car if I get this. No. You want to see how does that multiply so that you can improve other people's lives? How can you invest into others? How can you reduce debts? How can you get into a position where you can lavish onto others? And another verse that I love is, don't let the left hand know what your right hand is doing when you're giving, so that you now take your motivations off the table. And if you could take those motivations of self-promoting, those motivations of, I want to be seen as the certain percentage giver, or I want to be in my name in lights, I want to do those types of things, your giving really becomes in vain. I mean, God can still work on you with that, because I could say that from personal experience. And so there's a scarcity, stinginess, all the way up to kingdom 24/7, God, everything is yours, and I'm fully committed to you.
And I'm stepping into what I believe that you have called me to. Rob Bell tells a story in his book, Velvet Elvis. He talks about Peter walking on water, and that Jesus had to save him. And he said, who did Peter lose faith in? He didn't lose faith in Jesus. Jesus was doing fine.
Mm-hmm.
Peter lost faith in himself.
Yep.
And he lost it, but Jesus never lost faith in Peter. And so sometimes we need to realize that it's not just about us believing in God, it's about believing that God believes in us and stepping into everything that God has called us to. And that's a real paradigm shift. It was for me. So I'm really glad that you talked about that, Scott, and that we need to understand that God has given us something to sow, and we do need to be sowing it.
A really important question right here is, what are the possibilities?
Yes.
What are possibilities in front of you? So what would it look like if you were to do X?
Yes.
And I have encouraged people in asking them possibilities. So is there something in your kingdom, your realms, in your place that is there that you could do something? So I had a guy who was going to put in a little pitching range and build a little pond on his property. I said, so you got really fertile property here, right? And you have a water source, right? You have a well? Yeah. Well, go put some plants in. So he put these $3 plants in the ground, and they grew to $300 plants in just a few years with almost no work.
Wow.
And there was thousands.
See, now that's not something God has called me to, because I have a black thumb. But
yeah, but it's where your space is. I had somebody that worked for Disney, and I said, so do you have any opportunities of ever getting collectibles? Because it seems like you really like collectibles. I've seen some stuff on the wall. And he says, oh yeah, I like these cells from the movies. And I said, so could you buy those inexpensively and maybe sell them? And he says, yeah, I never even thought about that. And he made thousands of dollars part-time doing this. I know another guy that buys albums. He goes to garage sales and buys albums, and then he puts them on the internet. This guy makes a couple $1,000s a month pocket change.
Wow.
Just off of his albums he buys on just going to some garage sales. And then he sells them on the internet. He's been doing that for years. and he's built up. And so what he does is he goes and he builds more inventory. And he buys higher end stuff. And sometimes he goes to shops and he buys albums at shops, vinyl albums. That's his whole world, is vinyl albums. And he's really good at it. And he's nationally known now.
Wow.
Pretty neat stuff. So yeah, so in God's economy, we love people, we honor and serve others, we tell the truth. Remember, the father of lies is Satan. So God's economy, if you start telling lies, you're no longer in God's economy. You shifted to the world's economy. Okay. And financial services doesn't blatantly tell lies, but they omit and misrepresent and lead astray oftentimes, which is another form of lying. Okay. And you gotta avoid that as well. So you're chasing money, you're chasing power. It's all about the money. It's all about the power. You fall in love with that, and you ruin resources. They don't look at God's earth as being important, whereas I love being around ranchers. Ranchers are always thinking about the land, because I don't own the land. I'm a steward of the land, and the cows here are for my future generations. And they have a mindset that they've always been stewards of the land, because they know that if they waste the land and destroy it and dump horrible chemicals on the land, that rancher is not going to have, they're not going to have a future. And so they're always thinking in the realm of, I've got to protect that. Yeah. So this abundance and multiply. If you don't hear anything else today, hopefully you've gotten the idea that God's in a multiplication business. And the abundance.
Not just addition.
Business. It's not just addition. It's not just a little bit. Now, we still invest into some things, and we do some steady plotting, and we still invest in some things that might earn 3, 4, 5, 10%. And that's really kind of addition. But we need to be thinking about what are those opportunities that could present multiplication, and where could God use us in that. So Certified Kingdom Advisor, it's a 20 courses, and it's a booklet, And it's actually being taught at Liberty University, Indiana Wesleyan, Regent, a bunch of other colleges, Christian colleges, and it's taught along with the certified financial planner. And so Certified Kingdom Advisor, I've got my Certified Kingdom Advisor in 2010. Since then, I've been going to monthly meetings where other advisors, we unpack biblical truths. We hear from world leaders, thought leaders, and learn all kinds of things and bring resources, powerful resources that I love to share with my clients, with other people that I encounter. And we as a group will encourage one another. And then there's a big conference once a year in addition to that. Thanks for letting me say something about Kingdom Advisors. Great organization. So some personal observations. When people are in transition with their work, when they have medical issues, when they have retirement as their next chapter, they're upsizing, downsizing their house, all of these types of things require some outside counsel. And in fact, my wife and I were downsizing, and we had some disagreements about some things. So we went to my friend Mike, who's a financial advisor, and the things that I had been trying to tell my wife and convey to her were always coming across as pushy, manipulative, defensive, and we were butting heads. And it wasn't bad stuff that we just miscommunicated. And when Mike asked the questions and he posed individual questions for each of us, we were able to sort it out quickly. And literally in 2 meetings, we were able to sort through some really serious decision making. And I'm so glad that we did. We did this a few years back. We've gone back since then and had to flesh through some more things. And he was able to help us with that as well. So financial advisors need financial advisors, especially when you get into something emotional. And a lot of this stuff is emotional, and the forest for the trees, you can't see it, you get emotional. I get defensive. I've defended things that were not worth defending, and my wife was absolutely right. And I was supposedly the financial guy, and I, got emotional, did some stuff.
Financial advisors need financial advisors, just like counselors need counselors.
Counselors need counselors, yeah. And so this idea of charitable leverage, I have found money where people were just shocked. I have found resources in giving and how they tax structure things and how they give, and mechanisms that can make their taxes much smarter so that they could leverage more gifts. Very, very exciting. Responsible children resources. So there's a lot of resources, stuff in the Bible, stuff that's been written, personal examples. One story I love to tell, and I created a video on this, is so when my boys were little, okay, and I also have a daughter, but she's been to the dump too. So the field trip was to go to the city dump. So I took them out in the truck. I loaded some stuff up in the back. We're going to go to the dump and take some stuff. So we get out to the dump, and on the way in, I slow down real slow, and we look off to the side, and there's like a mountain of computers and computer screens. I mean, a mountain, like hundreds and hundreds of these. And I say, you know something? Everything ends up in the dump eventually. So that those computers you've been talking about, they end up here. We saw some washers and dryers, a huge stack. I mean, it was like a pile that was like 20 feet tall. And it was a bunch of washers and dryers. Then we came along to big screen TVs, those big ugly tube ones, and there was a bunch of those. And it was like, that used to be expensive. And so all this stuff eventually rusts and decays and breaks and gets thrown in the dump. My kids are going, okay, we get it. And I took them in, and we did some more. And then we talked about it a little bit afterwards. And then when we were out at the store, and I think we were at one of the big box places, and there was this really cool television, and one boy said to the other boy, "Oh, isn't that cool? Look at how nice that television is compared to ours." And they were like, "Oh yeah." And then the other one goes, "Yeah, but remember, it ends up in the dump. We don't need it." And I'm like, yes, it's working. So there are little things that you can do. And I tell grandparents, you ought to take your grandchildren to the dump and share with them the importance that there's so much that's temporal. that's passing away. This culture has so much involvement. That iPhone, it's going to be out of date 3-4 years from now. And according to my kids, it's 2.5 years.
Yeah.
But these things become obsolete. And you know what's not obsolete? God's principles, God's relationships, man's relationship with other people. When you can lean into that, that's powerful. That's worth it all. That's part of the joy and the contentment, is when you can really see those things occurring. The last thing is the 100X, the real wealth building. It doesn't come from, I'm going to go buy into this stock market thing and it's going to make maybe 10% on average for the next 10 years. And it might have some years when it's down. Like right now, it might be down 20%. Might be up 20% next year. Who knows? Well, 20% down to 20% up, it's still not back to zero. Yeah. It's still underwater. So kingdom wealth building is really looking at yourself personally, looking at the good soil and asking, what are possibilities? Important stuff. So how much value should a Christian be allowed to be able to add to the world? Should we be limited? As a Christian, if we're going to add value to another person's life, should there be any limit on that? No.
I don't think so. Do you?
No, it's completely wide open. You can just bring unlimited amount of abundance and value. And as you bring value to other people and you're really bringing true value to them, wealth follows behind that. Success, and it may not always be financial wealth. It may be other types of wealth, but when you bring value to other people, you're co-creating with God. So you look into other people's lives and you can bring value to them, serve them, honor them. It's a beautiful thing. Wow. Makes the world a better place. So the parting question is, are you managing your money? That's God's money, because he owns it all, remember? We're stewards, in a way that improves your life. And if you're not doing that and you want to have a conversation about what are some ways in which that could be improved in your life, and what are you dealing with from a challenge right now, and taking that challenge and seeing what I found in my 30 plus years of doing this is it's a lot easier to prepare than to repair. And if we can be preparing for downturns and uncertainties and, oh no, now my parents are needing assisted living, and how are we going to pay for that, and deal with the complexities of that and the process and what's available from the government, from the VA and places like that. So how do you deal with stuff like that? Preparing for that ahead of time, as opposed to trying to repair it after you're in the thick of it and the emotion of it, really, really tough. So would love to have engagement on that. And you can reach me, the next screen here. It'll have my telephone number and email. So it's scott@stewardshipmatters.net, 407-644-9411. And Dawn, thank you for doing this interview and participating with me. And I know we're going to have some more conversations about this kingdom wealth building idea based upon our pre-talk. And I want to thank each person for attending today, and reach out to Dawn or myself if you'd like to talk about counseling issues. If you want to talk about, talk to a wisdom merchant, that's what I'll call myself today, a wisdom merchant, to bring wisdom to the table, but not just mankind's wisdom, but bring biblical wisdom to you.
Well, thanks, Scott, for having this interview. Thanks for giving us all this information about the difference between worldly perspective and kingdom perspective. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that you'll reach out to us. Have a great day.